On this edition of Sightings, a UFO invades a high-security military base, leaving behind frightened eyewitnesses.
It's like they're playing with kids. That's scary.
Extraterrestrial spy or government secret? Then, where is Deborah Palmer?
How can you say what it's like for 25 years to look for somebody?
Now, psychic Dorothy Allison believes she knows what happened to Debbie.
It was a violent fight. I mean, he was really going at it.
Is this historic footage that proves aliens exist, or is it a cruel hoax?
You're saying that they used a human body.
And that makes it one of the most despicable hoaxes ever perpetrated.
Later, Jack Wheeler is convinced he is alive today because a spirit of love rescued him from certain death.
And then I remember falling and her catching me.
Plus, Bigfoot is tracked in Ohio.
Welcome to Sightings. I'm Tim White. The videotape you're about to see is different. It was shot in late 1994 in the government's own backyard, the super-secret Nellis Test Range in southern Nevada. Had the tape not been smuggled out, it might well have been classified by authorities. The base employees in this report appear at considerable professional risk, and therefore their identities have been heavily disguised.
21.3 degrees, 18.5 degrees elevation.
Remote-controlled cameras monitor the 7,700 square miles of airspace above the Nellis Range. The cameras record fighter jet training, tactical exercises, and in at least one case, this UFO. The video from a tracking location known only as S-30 was fed into Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas. Personnel there monitor what is supposed to be classified data about aircraft runs over the 3 million acres of desert that make up the Nellis Range. An unknown aircraft making its way onto the complex, says aerospace journalist Bill Sweetman, is not considered standard operating procedure.
I don't think you'd really see many objects wandering in by accident. They're very, very careful to ensure that sort of thing doesn't happen. The potential for serious accident if somebody is really straying into the range is very, very serious.
And yet, something obviously did stray in, and it frightened the camera's remote-controlled operators.
This craft shows up, and it's like they're playing with kids. It's like, do whatever they want and buy now. That's scary.
I've never seen anything like this before. This was my first encounter seeing anything of this nature. And I've been working the ranges for close to 10 years.
It seemed to move in whichever direction it wanted to go whenever it wanted to, contrary to any aircraft that I've seen in the past.
Chuck DeCaro is a former member of U.S. Special Forces, specializing in state-of-the-art military technology. He has analyzed hours of video footage of supposed UFOs, debunking many. But he has never seen anything like the Nellis UFO.
In my first look at that tape, I said, wow. And I continue to say, wow. There are only 3 things that could be on that tape. One is a very elaborate and very expensive hoax. I don't think that's what we're seeing. The second is some kind of a black project, a secret project that has some very unusual aerodynamic characteristics. And the third, if you can eliminate all those aerodynamic answers, could be a true unknown. And if that is an unknown, if you can come to that conclusion, you've got a pretty interesting piece of history right there.
To rule out the possibility of a hoax, Sightings asked a government subcontractor who uses the same image analysis computer as the Department of Defense to analyze the S-30 tapes. He has asked to remain anonymous.
The video appears to be genuine. Specifically, it was taken by contractor personnel that are operating tracking sites for the United States Air Force.
Could the Nellis UFO be a rare glimpse at a military black project? The stealth bomber is one former black project tested in Nevada and early on misidentified by civilians as a UFO. But our sources insist that when black projects are tested, the tracking cameras are deactivated.
The camera operators in the tracking sites are not exposed to those highly classified aircraft on a typical basis.
Chuck DeCaro and the government video engineer compared notes on the possibility that this UFO was a black project.
What's startling about it is that it doesn't resemble any shapes that I would know immediately. And that's why I thought it was interesting to start with.
It almost appears to be like spherical in the center and with an appendage on the bottom and on the top. You don't see any evidence of rotors.
No. And also the startling thing is it seems to change shape.
Another anomalous characteristic of the object is its apparent ability to change shape instantaneously.
The physical profile of the object changes almost frame to frame. Sometimes it appears almost to be a fuzzy, gassy cloud. In some portions of the video, it appears to be several spherical objects surrounding a dark mass.
To get a better look at the flight characteristics of the Nellis UFO, Sightings consulted with Chip Peterson, a video processing expert. He stabilized and enhanced several minutes of the S-30 video.
I basically moved each frame, and you can see the frames actually moving now, showing the degree that I had to move the image in order to keep this object stable in the center.
The stabilized image clearly shows the odd shape of the object shifting and turning in the sky.
I then took the numbers one by one and reconstructed the flight path, and that's the only way I could determine what the actual motion was. And I recreated that in 3 dimensions. It's initially heading away from the camera, and it abruptly changes, and during this phase, the range is increasing. It's actually going away from the camera. And at this point, it changes direction. Wind wouldn't do that. It wouldn't change that abruptly. And it wouldn't follow a constant radius throughout this entire portion here. It's all at constant distance from the camera. It's as if it's observing the ground position just as the ground is observing it and maintaining this constant distance.
Based on his knowledge as an aerospace engineer, Peterson offered one possible explanation for the abrupt turns performed by the UFO.
You could interpret it as if it determined it was on radar at this point. Perhaps if you're on radar, of course, you can sense that in all of our fighter planes. You know when you're being tracked. As soon as you get a lock or you get this radar signal, it would seem to me that this object was interested in who's observing it, and it turned in order to find out.
When something starts to change shape like that in the air, you become very, very puzzled, because you realize that you're looking at something that appears to involve a whole new technology that we don't understand. What you want to do, of course, is go and find the person who's invented this and say, whatever made you think of that, and what does it do, and how does it do it?
But we will probably never know who created this new technology. Questions about the earthly or otherworldly origins of the Nellis UFO are unanswerable. Until the mastermind behind this craft comes forward, there is only speculation and fear.
Like us viewing an ant farm. And the ants think they're it. That's the scary part.
To this day, the origin of the UFO has not been determined. Sightings forwarded a copy of the Nellis videotape to the Pentagon requesting an official response. As of this broadcast, the Air Force has not responded to Sightings' request.
Next, for 25 years, Debbie Palmer's friends and family have been tortured by one agonizing question. What happened to Debbie?
I knew she was coming back to me.
A young woman disappears. No sign of foul play, no known enemies, no trace. When Deborah Palmer's family reported her missing, the police didn't know if she'd been kidnapped, murdered, or had simply walked away from her life. After finding no evidence of a crime, the search for Deborah Palmer was suspended. But in a sad paradox, the very circumstances that caused the police to stop looking are what continue to give her family hope that Deborah will be found.
Someone out there knows what happened to Debbie.
Debbie Palmer was the archetypal girl next door. At 18, she was a model and a beauty queen, a fun-loving friend, an adoring daughter. Her life was filled with promise for the bright future ahead and the home and family she hoped to have one day. Debbie dreamed of being in the headlines, but when that dream came true in 1970, the headline read, "Feared Dead."
Debbie and I were like sisters. She was a fun-loving, sweet child that never met a stranger. Everybody was her friend, and she was just precious.
She loved to ride horses. She was a people person. She loved people. She got along well with everybody.
For 25 years, Ann Palmer has lived with the grief and uncertainty of not knowing what happened to her daughter Debbie. Even now, she holds out hope that Debbie is alive.
When she first disappeared, I kept hearing her voice say, "Mom, I'm all right. Mom, I'm all right."
Ann was an actress, a model, and a single mother. In 1954, she packed up 3-year-old Debbie and left Dallas for Hollywood. They were a family of 2, and mother and daughter were exceptionally close. Ann says their bond went beyond love.
Debbie and I had a very powerful psychic connection. When she was a teenager and she would be out late, I could simply think, "Debbie, where are you?" Almost within a matter of 15 minutes, the phone would ring or she'd come home.
Shortly before her 19th birthday, Debbie returned to Dallas and moved into her first apartment. She was so popular among the tenants at the Carrollwood Apartments, they named her Miss Carrollwood. She seemed to know everyone and had a very active social life. The apartment complex would be the last place anyone remembered seeing Debbie Palmer. She vanished on September 8, 1970.
Well, I didn't know she'd vanished at first. She'd been missing for 4 days at that point. And so we called the police, and the police said, "She's 18, there's nothing we can do. We can't look for her. There's no foul play indicated." And then it was terror.
Once an intense search did begin, the trail had grown cold. The only significant break in the case came 2 full weeks after her disappearance, the discovery of 2 packed suitcases in the woods north of Dallas.
I got a call one day from Plano, Texas, from the police department, and they said they had found her luggage and that we could come over and claim it. Now it was just going to be a matter of time till they found her body.
But Debbie's body was never found. There were no signs of foul play or a reason for Debbie to run. In police work, there are just so many roads you can travel before you hit a dead end.
It is a mystery because we can't determine whether there was foul play involved, whether she's a victim of a crime, or she simply, on her own, simply walked away from her life as it existed then and is still alive somewhere.
I looked for her at every street for 15 years. I looked everywhere for her. I knew I was going to find her. I knew she was coming back to me.
Nothing that we heard gave us really hope. I had to keep the hope going.
Roy Brockaway was the sheriff of neighboring Kaufman County. He was a family friend who became closely involved in the investigation.
We just never have come across anything that has indicated to us what happened to Debbie.
Sightings brought world-renowned psychic detective Dorothy Allison to Dallas to work with the former sheriff. As he drove near Debbie's last known address, Dorothy began to express strong psychic impressions of Debbie.
Roy, there's this one forest area where it's real isolated, where I believe that girl was taken.
Yes, if you've done a murder or anything like that, there is places out here that you can put a body that probably could never be found.
Although she did not know where the suitcases had been located, Dorothy guided Roy to a location eerily nearby.
Roy, this is the kind of a scene that I actually saw her in. It seems exactly like this spot here.
Dorothy's last stop was the Carrollwood Apartments. Outside Debbie's apartment, Dorothy attempted to psychically reconstruct the final hours before her disappearance.
What happened that night was that they had a very bad argument. She was with this one fellow that she had been going with for a while, and she wanted to get rid of him. And he said he was going out to the store someplace, but I believe he went to pick up some drugs. And then all of a sudden, this other fellow comes along. I feel like she was getting rid of one to go with the other. It was a violent fight. I mean, he was really going at it. So he takes her and just promises her to take her to a doctor, but instead where he takes her is to kill her.
Could Debbie Palmer have been murdered, as Dorothy's psychic visions seem to suggest? The scenario of jealousy, violence, and drug abuse certainly doesn't fit Debbie's wholesome image. But after Dorothy's psychic revelations, those who knew Debbie best admitted she could have been led astray.
It could have been the boyfriend. It was a party Thursday night is where she disappeared. And she said she was going to have a little talk with him. And then nobody remembers seeing her again. And it's possible she went to have that little talk with him, and he didn't like what she was saying, and he lost his temper and killed her. That's a possibility that's been in my mind all these years.
Dorothy showed Sharon the notes from her psychic impressions. Because legal charges have yet to be filed, we asked them to refrain from mentioning actual names of suspects.
Now here's a list of the names that I have written down. And you can tell, only you can tell me if you recognize anything there.
Without calling names, the first and the last name of the man she was dating, that she was going to have the little talk with, to break up with him, his first and last name are both here. And in between is, you have my grandmother's maiden name.
Debbie's family and friends were amazed at Dorothy's accuracy about the small details of Debbie's life. But believing Dorothy means confronting the probability that Debbie is dead.
How can you say what it's like for 25 years to look for somebody?
I will always hope and follow every lead to believe that she might still be alive somewhere in the world today.
Since our investigation in Texas, Debbie Palmer's cousin Sharon has contacted the Texas State Police. She presented the new psychic evidence generated by Dorothy Allison. According to State Police official Jim Chandler, this is not the kind of evidence that they feel justifies a reopening of the Palmer case.
Next, medical science discovers auras and evidence that California's Mammoth Mountain is really a mountain of doom.
Here are some of the stories Sightings is following in the news. Geologic discoveries near Mammoth Mountain in Northern California indicate to some that the dire prophecies of futurist Gordon Michael Scallion could be coming true. The picturesque landscape of Mammoth Mountain, California is deceiving. Beneath this pristine forest, there is a boiling, seething lake of molten earth poised to unleash its fury.
That the earth is going to open up in California, and I can tell you exactly where it will open up. It'll happen between Bakersfield and the Baja to Eureka.
While scientists do not take Scallion's prediction seriously, they do agree that the Mammoth area is a volatile location.
It's clear that there's going to be eruptions there in the future. And it's clear that large areas there will be covered with ash and be destroyed.
State University of New York volcanologist Marcus Bursick warns that recent earthquake activity has unleashed a fresh torrent of magma under the Mammoth Lakes area. The effect is similar to shaking a bottle of champagne and releasing carbon dioxide bubbles. But unlike champagne, the concentrations of carbon dioxide under the earth are deadly. Evidence that these poisonous gases are already working their way to the surface was discovered on Mammoth Mountain. Hundreds of trees here were killed by lethal emissions from the volatile magma below.
There's a lot of volcanoes in that area, and several of them showed an effect from the Landers earthquake. So this magma is sitting there stewing underneath the surface, and it's emitting this carbon dioxide along with other gases.
The last time Mammoth Mountain erupted, approximately 700,000 years ago, a dense volcanic cloud blocked out the sun and covered the western United States in a thick layer of ash. Today, there are those who believe the long dormant volcano's time has come again. In the fall of 1967, something strange crashed into the water off Shag Harbor, Nova Scotia. Since then, UFO investigator Chris Stiles has been building an impressive document trail indicating that the Canadian government knows more about the crash than they're willing to tell.
I believe that this was a device from another intelligent civilization, not of this Earth.
Now, Chris Stiles and Sightings are mounting a new full-scale investigation to scour the ocean floor beneath Shag Harbor in search of UFO debris. Our findings in an upcoming edition of Sightings. Researchers at Pennsylvania State University are confirming with technology what some holistic healers have felt for years, that the magnetic field around the human body changes with the onset of disease.
Well, this is a picture that shows basically the distribution of the magnetic field of a human body.
Michael Smith and his colleagues at the Penn State Magnetic Resonance Imaging Lab are pioneering a breakthrough technology for surgeons.
It can show them the positions of say, for instance, a tumor. You can show them the presence of a tumor or a disease that they're not aware of. And it really gives them a visual way to look into the human body and see what's wrong.
So that's the safe and give you a high resolution, also give you the image of the soft tissue.
The future of MRI technology offers tantalizing possibilities. But so far, it is only a diagnostic tool.
I think the comparison between holistic methods and techniques and MRI should be viewed, with caution. People should use those things that have been proven to be useful to diagnose their disease.
We'll have more stories from the news next time. Now, here's what's coming up on Sightings.
Dolores Wheeler loved her husband so much, she saved his life 12,000 miles away. And are these pictures of an alien autopsy an incredible find or an incredible fraud?
The risk of sounding pompous, yes, I could have done it a lot better.
For nearly 50 years, UFO researchers have been looking for the smoking gun that will prove once and for all that the government is lying about the incident at Roswell, New Mexico. And now, Sightings correspondent Carla Wohl reports that newly discovered film of a bizarre autopsy is adding fuel to the Roswell fire.
Since January 1995, the hottest news on the World Wide Web of UFO devotees is this photo, allegedly an extraterrestrial from the Roswell crash site being autopsied by the U.S. military. It's the UFO story of the decade.
This is an injury, and that deep wound is consistent with high temperature burns.
Okay. If this is truly genuine, then it becomes the focus of worldwide recognition that indeed our planet's being visited, that indeed governments have known for 48 years and haven't told us. The world will never be the same again.
Rumors of a Roswell autopsy film go back to 1993. London music promoter Ray Santilli told Bufora, the British UFO Research Association, that he had unearthed a bizarre 16mm movie in a private film vault.
Ray Santilli said, I have got my hands on some material. I know nothing about Roswell, but I'm being told by the man who sold this to me that he was in fact a military cameraman with the United States military back in 1947. And he said that this was the official record, US government record, of an event which occurred there, i.e. a crashed UFO and the recovery of aliens and, of course, that debris.
Kent Jeffrey is the author of the Roswell Declaration, a petition calling for the declassification of all government documents on Roswell. He eagerly anticipated the release of the autopsy film.
When I first heard about the film, I was very hopeful. I thought that we finally had what we'd been looking for in the way of evidence to prove this case. However, in the ensuing months, as I learned more and more facts about the film, I became less and less optimistic.
Now, Santilli says he has had it authenticated. He went to Kodak, and they said, yes, this is film stock from the 1940s.
Kodak did not authenticate the film. What Santilli did was go to Kodak and get clarification on the edge markings. The edge markings on the film are a square and a triangle. That signifies that the film was manufactured in either 1927 or 1947 or 1967. The only thing Kodak did was to verify that that is the case, that those edge markings signify those years.
Rand Molnar, dean of the Brooks Institute of Photography, finds it highly suspicious that Santilli went no further in his attempts to authenticate the film.
If this were a legitimate film with historical value, then I would think he would take every measure possible to try to get this authenticated. Taking it to an expert, to someone here or elsewhere, they could look at the film, analyze it, and then make a determination on whether it's actually legitimate, or if it should be tested further, or if there's something else that can be done with it to try to authenticate what event is transpiring on it, supposedly.
The dissemination of information from Ray Santilli in London is extremely unorthodox. It is extremely unusual for research of any kind to be carried out in this way.
Rather than release the film in its entirety, Santilli selectively leaked small portions of the film at invitation-only screenings. Many in attendance left unconvinced.
I still had a great deal of hope when I went over there to see the film. However, from the first few frames, I realized that this was a hoax, that this was a human body on that table.
You realize what you're saying. You're saying that they used a human body, a dead person, to perpetrate this hoax.
That is not only my opinion, but the opinion of most of the medical people who have seen this film now. And that makes it one of the most despicable hoaxes ever perpetrated.
Can I move the head side to side?
Makeup effects artist Steve Johnson built the aliens for the movie Roswell. He agrees that the autopsy film is a hoax, that it's not flesh and blood you're seeing, but a ripoff of his special effects creations.
Could you have done this? The risk of sounding pompous, yes, I could have done it a lot better. But the main thing is, it never proves once to me that this is a dead body. For instance, when they make incisions, they will begin the incision, then they cut away, or they cut in tighter. From a special effects technician's point of view, they used every trick that I would have asked a director to use had a director come to me and said, I want to do this great autopsy scene.
What are some of the tricks that you think they use specifically?
Human bodies do not bleed after they're dead. The blood coagulates in the veins, then settles to the lowest point. If you incise them, they don't bleed. This thing did bleed. And I thought, well, simplest, oldest trick in the book is a blood knife.
Show me.
It looks pretty much like that, because it does leave a line, and then a few trickles come out.
And that's it. I mean, simple as that.
I think so.
Why do you think someone did it?
It would be exciting, in a perverse kind of way, to be able to fool a lot of people like this. There is a lot of money being changed hands.
In fact, Santilli has profited from the autopsy film. He's reportedly signed six-figure deals with American, French, and Japanese television networks.
To put together a hoax like this would require a tremendous amount of time, effort, and money. Certainly the Roswell incident is one of the better documented UFO incidents, so this would be a likely candidate rather than some obscure thing.
Many ufologists worry that the flap over Santilli's film is obscuring the real story of Roswell. UFO researcher Clifford Stone gave me a tour of the old Roswell military base.
This was known as Hangar 84. In July of 1947, this building right here housed a secret that the United States government didn't want to talk about. As a matter of fact, I would state that they considered that secret so sensitive that it was rated higher than even the hydrogen bomb.
According to Stone, while the autopsy film may be a hoax, the recovery of aliens is not.
Bodies were seen by many people, including some credible military witnesses.
Among those propounding a theory of government cover-up is Walter Haut, the former Air Force lieutenant who was ordered to write the Roswell press release stating the UFO was a weather balloon.
I feel very, very sincerely that it was a cover-up. It was a way of burying something. I guess that's the easiest word to use.
Could Ray Santilli be just another unwitting pawn in a Roswell disinformation campaign?
Disinformation is not a word that a lot of people like. It implies our own government is putting out false stories. Gee, really? Could they do that? Yes. One of the things that you normally do in the intelligence community, all kinds everywhere, if some truth leaks out that you don't want leaked out, you flood the market with garbage. Then there's no way to separate out.
Do you hope that there is another film or some other evidence out there to prove that Roswell did in fact happen?
I certainly do, and I think it's a real possibility. And we are working very hard on trying to find any individuals who might have such evidence or who may have even just participated and now be willing to talk so that this information can be shared with the rest of the world.
Nearly everyone who's studied the Roswell autopsy film is convinced that it's a hoax. But Ray Santilli, the owner of the film, stands by its authenticity.
Next, a story of life-saving love that transcends time and space.
Felt a presence around me. I looked up and I saw my wife.
In 1970, Jack and Dolores Wheeler promised to love, honor, and cherish each other till death did them part. Within a year, the significance of those wedding vows would be tested on a Vietnam battlefield. Because of what happened there, Jack Wheeler has come to believe that his wife's love is a part of a supernatural force that saved his life more than once.
We just had an instant attraction for each other.
I'll never forget the first time I saw her when she came into the room there in the sorority house.
Love at first sight only begins to describe the instant, inexplicable bond that Jack and Dolores felt for each other from the moment they met.
He had asked me to marry him like 3 months after we met.
There was a whirlwind romance, a fairy tale wedding, and then a phone call from the draft board. After only 1 month of marriage, the Wheelers were separated by the Vietnam War.
Here we had just got married and were unsure as to the relationship and how it would survive with her staying in school and still going to college while I went off to Vietnam.
I wrote to him every day, and you know, I thought of him constantly. I knew he was in battle, but I didn't really want to think about it.
But while Dolores tried to push thoughts of danger out of her conscious mind, Jack insists that his new bride was still connected to him through her unconscious.
Something got me up that night.
There'd been a break in the fighting. The unrelenting sound of gunfire had stopped. Jack Wheeler was asleep in what infantry soldiers in Vietnam called a hooch.
I was laying there, and it was 2, 3 in the morning, and I felt a presence around me. And I looked up, and I saw my wife in a long robe, gown, beckoning to me. And I got up, went outside the hooch, and I was maybe 20 or 30 feet from it. And suddenly there were 2 loud explosions. 2 mortar rounds had come in and it hit the hooch where I was. And there was shrapnel throughout it and shrapnel throughout the cot and everything. And people would ask, you know, why I wasn't in the hooch. And I'm convinced that I saw her. I mean, it was very difficult to understand, and nobody understood it, and you couldn't explain it. And to this day, I can't explain it.
Back in the United States, Dolores Wheeler was unaware of Jack's close call and the fact that he had seen her exact double image beckoning him away from impending danger.
There's the Latin term alter ego. There's the Norse term Fardogr, which means forerunner.
Don Ward is a UCLA folklorist specializing in tales of the supernatural. He uses the word doppelganger to describe what Jack Wheeler experienced.
It's a German word for a universal phenomenon. That is the notion that the human spirit has an essence of its own that can be perceived visually by other people. And it is identical to the person themselves, right down to the clothes they wear.
But Jack Wheeler knew nothing of doppelgangers. He only knew that somehow, from a vast distance, Dolores was continuing to protect him from harm.
The choppers picked us up. They gave us some new rations and got some mail. And it was like 7 or 8 letters that I got from my wife. We were flying in, and I had one that I was trying to read it there, but you got your pack on and your weapon, and the doors of the chopper open, so the wind's blowing, and I was reading this letter from her, and it just started to turn the page when suddenly it flew out of my hand. So I sort of got up partially and scooted back to grab the letter, and just as I did, enemy fire.
Jack believes that if he hadn't ducked for that letter, he would have been killed. Many other men in his unit did die that day, and Jack wondered what special force had spared him once again.
A lot of mental activity occurs strictly on an unconscious level. And this may have been what was happening with Mrs. Wheeler. She may have been unconsciously aware of her husband's dangers half a world away in Vietnam.
Professor John Rohner chronicles the Wheelers' experience in this collection of true stories.
His thoughts probably were almost continually on her and hers on him. And I think that may have precipitated a telepathic connection and even a visitation.
We got hit. I took a bullet in my hip and a bullet in my shoulder, and the chopper crashed into some trees. And I was just laying there, and I was about 20 or 30 feet from the ground. And I looked down, and I could see this image of my wife. And she had her arms out, like to comfort me or to catch me. And then I remember falling and her catching me. And I was unconscious, and when I came to, they had me back in the base camp. They said that I just fallen down and it landed in a stream, and that it had broken my fall.
When he finally returned home, Jack told no one, not even Dolores, about the eerie visitations he had experienced in the jungles of Vietnam.
It was several years after he had returned from Vietnam. We were in the living room, and he started telling me about the time that I came to him and did this and that, and I just said, whoa, I came to you over there? That's impossible, you know, that's crazy. And, you know, we didn't talk about it for a while. And then when I would read something that was similar, I'd say, well, tell me some more about what you experienced. And then I found out there were quite a few people that had experienced the same thing.
There's a man in England, his name was Tyrrell, who came up with a theory and stated that there were such things as apparitions, which required two people. There had to be an agent to send the message, and there had to be the recipient to perceive it. The experiencing of the double occurred when these two people were in conjunction with one another.
After the war, Jack and Dolores devoted themselves to home and family. Dolores' special life-saving gift seemed to be a part of the past until April 19th, 1995, when Jack was just a little late getting to his Oklahoma City office.
Ironically, I got angry at my wife for getting me up 5 minutes late because I told her I needed to be in at this meeting, and I had some stuff I needed to do, and I needed to be in the office at 9. She said that she was busy doing some things, and she just didn't realize what time it was. I went through my normal routine and just left the house 5 minutes late. So I was driving into work, and normally I'm directly in front of the federal building.
For Jack, the extra 5 minutes that his wife allowed him to oversleep would mean the difference between life and death.
The explosion was like at 9 o'clock, 9:02, which is almost every morning I'm right there. And this morning, since I was about 5 minutes late, I was just exiting off of the freeway, getting onto 6th Street when the explosion occurred.
Where he parks his car is where all the cars caught on fire. A few minutes off, either way, he would have been seriously injured.
The Wheelers believed that it was something deep in Dolores' spirit that somehow kept Jack away from Ground Zero. His office was demolished. If he had been sitting at his desk, as he had every other morning, he would not have survived the blast.
I believe she has a gift. She has an ability to sense needs of her loved ones and be able to protect them. All I know is that I've experienced these things, and I don't believe that I'm dreaming. I just know that that is what I experienced, and that's what I've observed, and that's what I've lived.
Although Jack Wheeler's life was spared, the family's happiness is bittersweet. They wonder why so many lives had to be lost inside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, and they pray it will never happen again.
Next, startling new evidence of a Bigfoot in the wooded hills of Ohio.
When somebody told me there was Bigfoot in Ohio, I laughed.
Bigfoot expeditions have become a kind of a cottage industry in the Pacific Northwest. Entering Bigfoot country, the billboards proclaim. But recent sightings 1,500 miles to the east seem to indicate that Bigfoot's range may extend all the way across the Rockies and into the Midwest.
I would like to report what I believe to be a Bigfoot sighting approximately 5 miles from Lisbon, Ohio.
Probability of a Bigfoot being sighted in Ohio obviously is lower than in the Northwest, but you can never exclude it absolutely, because historically there have been a goodly number of sightings made in that area of the country.
Biologist Dr. Henner Fehrenbach specializes in primate research at a college near his home in Beaverton, Oregon. His extensive analysis of Bigfoot evidence grew out of a casual interest in the subject during the 1960s.
Scientists that are ordinarily quite rational refuse to even inform themselves of the evidence that is available. They reject it as if it was a ghost.
When somebody told me there was Bigfoot in Ohio, I laughed. I didn't believe it.
But compelling physical evidence and eyewitness reports have made George Clapperson and Jody Cook believers. Together, they have formed the Ohio Bigfoot Research and Study Group in Cincinnati, Ohio. A 24-hour Bigfoot hotline has been set up to record area sightings.
They make a report in 1988. You investigate it in 95, and everything is still exactly the same. They take you to where they had the sighting, and there's fresh evidence where they had their sighting years ago. That's pretty convincing.
In February of 1995, Clapperson and Cook discovered an anomalous structure near Akron, Ohio, that they believe may be a Bigfoot nest. It is similar to, but larger than, nesting sites of other primates.
It was about 4.5 feet high and about 5.5 feet long. It was completely hollow on the inside. It was big enough for 3 of us to go and sit in comfortably.
Are these the sounds of Bigfoot? Sightings received these sounds recorded in Ohio by Bigfoot researcher Matt Moneymaker. The recording is part of an extensive surveillance project that Moneymaker is conducting in southern Ohio. Sightings will bring you more on the results of this investigation on a future edition of our program.
Peter Byrne of the Bigfoot Research Project is cautiously optimistic about the reported sightings in Ohio. In an average 6-month period, Byrne receives more than 3,000 calls. But from those calls, less than 5 are found to be credible sightings.
If you've had a paranormal experience, please write to us at Sightings. Sightings can also be contacted at America Online at keyword sightings. At the Sightings Forum, download images, sounds, and QuickTime clips. Also, join us daily in our chat room, live on AOL.
Until next time, remember, no mystery is closed to an open mind. For Sightings, I'm Tim White.
Next on Sci-Fi, Dark Shadows.
Sci-Fi World. Monday, Superhero Land. Tuesday, Creature Land. Wednesday, Intergalactic Land. Danger! Thursday, Fantastic Land. Friday, Inhuman Land.
Sci-Fi World, chain reactions of sci-fi's greatest hits. Weekdays, 11 to 4, Eastern and Pacific on Sci-Fi.
Conclusion, you got a pretty interesting piece of history right there.
To rule out the possibility of a hoax, Sightings asked a government subcontractor who uses the same image analysis computer as the Department of Defense to analyze the S-30 tapes. He has asked to remain anonymous.
The video appears to be genuine. Specifically, it was taken by contractor personnel that are operating tracking sites for the United States Air Force.
Could the Nellis UFO be a rare glimpse at a military black project? The stealth bomber is one former black project tested in Nevada and early on misidentified by civilians as a UFO. But our sources insist that when black projects are tested, the tracking cameras are deactivated.
The camera operators in the tracking sites are not exposed to those highly classified aircraft on a typical basis.
Chuck DeCaro and the government video engineer compared notes on the possibility that this UFO was a black project.
What's startling about it is that it doesn't resemble any shapes that I would know immediately. And that's why I thought it was interesting.
Remote-controlled cameras monitor the 7,700 square miles of airspace above the Nellis Range. The cameras record fighter jet training, tactical exercises, and in at least one case, this UFO. The video from a tracking location known only as S30 was fed into Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas. Personnel there monitor what is supposed to be classified data about aircraft runs over the 3 million acres of desert that make up the Nellis Range. An unknown aircraft making its way onto the complex, says aerospace journalist Bill Sweetman, is not considered standard operating procedure.
I don't think you'd really see many objects wandering in by accident. They're very, very careful to ensure that sort of thing doesn't happen. The potential for serious accident if somebody is really straying into the range is very, very serious.
And yet, something obviously did stray in, and it frightened the camera's remote-controlled operators.
This craft shows up, and it's like they're playing with kids.
On this edition of Sightings, a UFO invades a high-security military base, leaving behind frightened eyewitnesses.
It's like they're playing with kids. That's scary.
Extraterrestrial spy or government secret? Then, where is Deborah Palmer?
How can you say what it's like for 25 years to look for somebody?
Now, psychic Dorothy Allison believes she knows what happened to Debbie.
It was a violent fight. I mean, he was really going at it.
Is this historic footage that proves aliens exist, or is it a cruel hoax?
You're saying that they used a human body.
And that makes it one of the most despicable hoaxes ever perpetrated.
Later, Jack Wheeler is convinced he is alive today because a spirit of love rescued him from certain death.
And then I remember falling and her catching me.
Plus, Bigfoot is tracked in Ohio.
Welcome to Sightings. I'm Tim White. The videotape you're about to see is different. It was shot in late 1994 in the government's own backyard, the super-secret Nellis Test Range in southern Nevada. Had the tape not been smuggled out, it might well have been classified by authorities. The base employees in this report appear at considerable professional risk, and therefore their identities have been heavily disguised.
21.3 degrees, 18.5 degrees elevation.
It's like, do whatever they want and buy now. That's scary.
I've never seen anything like this before. This was my first encounter seeing anything of this nature. And I've been working the ranges for close to 10 years.
It seemed to move in whichever direction it wanted to go whenever it wanted to, contrary to any aircraft that I've seen in the past.
Chuck DeCaro is a former member of U.S. Special Forces, specializing in state-of-the-art military technology. He has analyzed hours of video footage of supposed UFOs, debunking many. But he has never seen anything like the Nellis UFO.
In my first look at that tape, I said, wow. And I continue to say, wow. There are only 3 things that could be on that tape. One is a very elaborate and very expensive hoax. I don't think that's what we're seeing. The second is some kind of a black project, a secret project that has some very unusual aerodynamic characteristics. And the third, if you can eliminate all those aerodynamic answers, could be a true unknown. And if that is an unknown, if you can come to that conclusion,